Thank you, Tom, for agreeing to be our first guest. I'm super excited to learn about your story. So my name is Bronze, and basically I for the work that I do, I basically help to support startup community events in Greater China. But at the same time, I'm also very passionate about the topic of like, how do people actually find out what they wanted to do and what are the steps that they take in order to get to where they are today. Because I feel like there's so many like students that I saw, they're just like, they're studying and then they graduated, but they're not necessarily sure like what should the step that they should be taking or what they should be doing. So we hope to discover and discuss about that today. So to start with, Tom, would you like to just share a little bit about like what you're doing in StartSomeGood, and also like what actually inspired you to start this company?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to participate in conversations like this, and particularly one of my real passions and great joys is always talking to people at the early part of their entrepreneurial journey, and hopefully a few of the things I might have to say tonight might be helpful in some way in those early steps. For me, the inspiration so there's a few things, you know, that went into the founding of StartSomeGood. I'd previously founded 3 not-for-profits and 2 social enterprises. So everything I've ever done has been focused on social impact. And so I spent my 20s kind of building an organization called Vibewire in Australia that was using technology in innovative ways to engage young people more fully in democracy. And it was really hard to raise money for that organization. You know, it was we were doing stuff that was really new at the time. We had no track record of having successfully done those sorts of projects. No one had a track record of doing those sorts of things. We did things like, you know, we're hosting, this is kind of like a virtual summit right now. We're hosting our big virtual summit, StartSomeGood that is hosting our big annual virtual summit next week. We held kind of like a proto virtual summit in 2001. We launched a youth culture portal in 2000. We opened the first co-working space in Australia in 2006. So the fundraising process was challenging because the social sector is not very good at supporting innovation, because there's a lot of fear about funding things that don't work. And there's a fundamental conservatism that comes from a good place. You know, the people who have the privilege to have resources that are dedicated for social benefit, whether those are foundations or impact investors or governments, I know from my experience, they almost all take that very seriously. They're trying to do the most good they can. But what the most good they can ends up meaning a lot of the time is the most good that they can feel, you know, very confident is going to happen. So there just isn't much of an appetite for risk. And so through the eight and a half years that I was working on Vibewire, which is still around today now, just turned 20, which kind of blows my mind. We kind of evolved into a social enterprise. I wasn't really familiar with the model. I hadn't, you know, it wasn't kind of a big part of the conversation back then. It was just through sheer necessity of having to figure out ways of funding the things we wanted to do that we realized that, you know, while we could get some grants, it was never enough. And we had to significantly supplement that with earned revenue of various sorts. So that's what kind of began to get me into the social enterprise sector. But what really catalyzed, I guess, the thinking around StartSomeGood was when a few years later I lived in San Francisco for 2 years, and I worked for a social innovation lab in Silicon Valley called Hope Lab. But it wasn't the Hope Lab experience per se that kind of inspired StartSomeGood. It was more just the whole ecosystem of the Bay Area, and feeling like for the first time in my life I kind of knew what a pro-innovation ecosystem looked like. And what it actually looks like is a lot of failure. You know, from the outside, I think people have very kind of mythic ideas of what the, you know, Silicon Valley and San Francisco are like, that it's just super smart people doing clever things. And it's actually like, you know, filled with the, you know, the biggest collection of terrible ideas you've ever come across in your whole life. But to some extent, that's what an innovation ecosystem looks like. It looks like trying lots of things. It looks like lots of stuff that doesn't seem sensible, that doesn't seem likely to work, that in fact won't work. And what powers that in the Bay Area and in most startup sectors around the world is the work of angel investors. And so I'm sure you guys are all studying entrepreneurship, you understand there's kind of 2 main categories of investors, very broadly speaking. I mean, there's all sorts of others, there's, you know, philanthropy and government, but in terms of private investors, private equity investment in startups, angel investors tend to go first. They invest at a very early stage with very little evidence often, and they can do that because they're investing their own money. And so you can invest your money whenever you like. You can be as risky as you want to be. You can be as idiosyncratic as you want to be. And then as startups progress a little bit further, they'll then start raising money from venture capitalists. Venture capitalists are investing other people's money, and therefore they have to justify their decisions. They have to make decisions that seem sensible, that can be justified, and so they need to bat a much higher success rate than the average angel. And so they make decisions based on data. They look at the actual, they don't just like listen to a fancy pitch. They really want to see what's the evidence, what's your cost per customer acquisition, what's the lifetime value, data. But the only reason they're able to make those decisions based on data is that data has mostly been collected thanks to the investment of the angel investors, but they essentially funded the experiment. And then VCs fund successful experiments. And what I realized through that time there is that in the social sector, the area that I care most about, building companies or organizations to make a difference in the world, that it's like a sector that's filled with all VCs or VC equivalents and no angels. That the funders tend to be governments or corporates, big companies or foundations, and they're almost always spending someone else's money. And they need to do so in a way that can be justified and that seems sensible. And so they want to make those decisions based on data. The problem for social innovation is that we don't really have anyone or far too few people playing the angel role, funding the experiments. And so that's where we thought we need to find new ways of helping fund early stage and innovative ideas for social impact. And we looked around and thought, what's doing a good job of supporting stuff that is new, that is innovative, that is different, that is unproven. And I got really interested in the role that crowdfunding was playing in the creative arts, supporting emerging artists and musicians and inventors and all sorts. And a light bulb went off for us that that's the kind of mechanism that we need for social change as well. Not that we need to kind of take what we've learned supporting creative entrepreneurs and teach social entrepreneurs how to do that as well. And so that's why we launched the original StartSomeGood platform 9 years ago. Now, since then, we've evolved enormously, and we do a lot more than just crowdfunding now. Crowdfunding is only about 15% of our revenue. The majority of what we do is teaching people how to crowdfund. In a way, teaching people how to tell their story, how to design, theories of change and business models, how to pitch to the right people in the right way to raise the funds that you need. And so we run a number of accelerators each year, or pre-accelerator programs and capacity building programs for everyone from Asian charity services in Hong Kong to the United Nations Development Program in the Pacific, to a number of leading companies here in Australia. So that was a really long answer.
Wow, that's an amazing story. And you mentioned about you got the idea of starting the nonprofit, the Vibe Wire, back in when you were in your 20s. Like, how do you know you wanted to start? Like, what got you even begin to interested in social impact, like in this area where you wanted to like help people in this area?
I think I was 19 actually. I was at university, like maybe second year. I mean, I've always been, well, not always, but like almost as long as I can remember, I've been interested in social impact. I was, brought up in a relatively politically engaged family, and certainly a very purpose-driven family. I was very fortunate, I think, to have two parents that did very purpose-driven work. They're both public servants. They weren't entrepreneurs, but my dad was a town planner working for the head town planner of the town I grew up in. And my mum worked for the ABC, which is the government-owned media organization. And they were both very kind of purposeful in why they did what they did. My dad really believes in and is very passionate about the role town planning plays in, building spaces where people can come together and affecting the kind of, the dynamic and the quality of life for an urban population. And my mum's very passionate about the role a public broadcaster plays in a democracy and the importance of, using public-owned media to share diverse voices and, empower citizens. And so I think I think I was really lucky because I grew up with, in some ways, that was my model of what work looked like. That work wasn't something, work wasn't something where you do it because you have to, and then you find your real sense of kind of purpose and pleasure outside of work. I had these role models where those two things were kind of interconnected. And so that kind of was my mental model of that's what work should kind of look and feel like, whatever it was. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I was looking for that kind of feeling, that kind of sense of making a difference. And I was very fortunate that I kind of stumbled into, I think, my personal mission or sense of purpose at quite an early age. A few years before, when I started Vibewire, when I was 16 actually, and I was in the US on exchange for a year, and I was through, you know, a series of kind of very fortunate circumstances that are probably too long-winded to explain right now. I found myself at this incredible conference in San Francisco, and the only reason I got to be there was that I happened to be an Australian on the year program with a particular exchange organization, student exchange organization in America at the right time to somehow be invited to attend this event. And it really changed my life. You know, meeting these incredible global leaders. I met a couple of different Nobel Peace Prize winners. I met Mikhail Gorbachev, randomly enough, like just these kind of world leaders and these very, you know, very high impact, very passionate, very driven people, including the other young people, mostly. That walking away from that, I had a really strong sense that I had to kind of do something that made a difference. But it was actually kind of reflecting back on that experience and actually realizing the kind of shortcomings of that experience that really gave me my sense of direction. Because as I thought more about the experience I just had, which was deeply empowering to me, I realized that what I just experienced is kind of how youth empowerment tends to happen, which is it's kind of tokenistic, it's haphazard. Like, it was so random I was there. It wasn't like some meritocratic process because I was the most deserving Australian to get to go to this thing. And it's very biased towards wealth. I realized that they had 32 young people from 29 countries there as the kind of youth delegation inside this much bigger, you know, event filled with much more important people. And they'd, as I said, they'd kind of cherry-picked us all from a student exchange program. And so we had this surface diversity, you know, we were boys and girls, we were first world, you know, the developed world and developing world, we were all different skin colors. But I realized that every single one of us had parents who could afford to send us to America for a year. And it got me thinking a lot about how do you make the experience that I just had, this experience of kind of meeting and engaging with incredible people, the experience of having the chance to tell my own story and feel like my voice mattered. How do you give that experience not just to this kind of rare kind of niche of young people, but to all young people? And that's, you know, that's what led me to found my first not-for-profit, which was a high school student organization in Sydney. And then that ultimately led on to a university student organization, which led on to launching Vibewire, because I was interested in leveraging technology and the internet and media. My fascination was really media more so than technology. But what was interesting was having a type of media, thanks to technology, which is both massive reach and low cost, and that had never before existed in human history. And that ultimately has led me to StartSomeGood, which is to help people like me 15 years ago, trying to get a new idea off the ground and not having a lot of access to traditional financing or traditional philanthropy or traditional investment, and needing to build a community of supporters in order to do that.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's interesting to see like how one event actually could be like changing the course of your life. And you mentioned about like in that, like when you were 16 you came across your mission. Like what was that like? Were you having like a statement of that is what you wanted to do, that you feel like you have your mission, and like how was it, and like did it change across the year? Like I know that you're always in the social impact sector, but did the statement or the mission statement actually changed?
Not really, interestingly. I mean, it does for a lot of people. Everything I've ever done has been about building a better democracy or a more democratic society. And what I mean by that is I'm not really focused on elections specifically. I'm focused on participation and how people are able to be involved in their community in a way that makes a difference, and how communities are able to come together to create the kind of future that they want. And that to me is true democracy, because democracy is being able to have an impact on the future. And so, you know, with those early kind of organizations, I was very focused on young people. I thought kind of participation was a unique challenge for young people. And you know, there are elements of that. And perhaps it's very convenient that as I got older, I began to think that maybe it's not a uniquely youth issue. It's kind of more systemic and broader than that. And my whole kind of, I guess, my angle on crowdfunding and why I'm really passionate about crowdfunding is because I see it in that context. That crowdfunding is is kind of democratizing fundraising. It's a set of shared infrastructure that enables people to come together to create the future that they want for their community in a collective way. And so I've kind of pursued that goal in a lot of different ways. I feel like I've done kind of communities and student associations. I've been very interested in media. I've run a film festival that toured around the country in cinemas and published magazines and anthologies. I'm interested in events, conferences, and now we do a lot of work with online events. And I'm interested in how you help people. Ultimately, I'm interested though in how you help people, I guess, make a difference. And I guess my particular interest is that I'm really fascinated by the infrastructure for change making. What are the different tools and kind of shared infrastructure, whether that's platforms or physical spaces, or cultural assets that enable us to kind of more effectively come together to make a difference. And that's, that was the kind of thinking that made me want to open a co-working space back before there were any in Australia, so that people could, collectively come together, share resources, make things happen. It's the same thing that makes me really, kind of really passionate about and excited about crowdfunding and the role that it can play.
And like, were you, because I saw that you also involved in a lot of different, I saw you, yeah, I saw you also involved in a lot of like different role, like you mentioned about like you like about advertisement, and also you also did like project management, these sort of things. And like, were you doing running the non-profit parallel to those different work that you were doing, or was it how was it?
Yeah, I mean, it always, I've always kind of started things in a very bootstrap kind of way. Vibe, I started with a bunch of friends at university, and it took several years before we were able to really pay ourselves very much for that. So, had all sorts of other jobs, not great jobs, university student kind of jobs that I was juggling at the time, sometimes good jobs, but often not. But my real passion there was, the work I was doing for the organization. And within about 3 years, it was my primary source of income. And within maybe 4 years, it was my only source of income. And then it was my only source of income for about 5 years after that. StartSomeGood was similar. I mean, I co-founded it with someone I'd met working at an organization called Ashoka in Washington, DC, but I'd moved to San Francisco by the time that, kind of Alex and I got talking about this, and I didn't have a lot of flexibility. I was on a sponsored working visa to be in the US, so it was kind of a bit binary. Either I worked full time and could be in San Francisco and could stay, or I had to quit my job and move home. I couldn't like just go to 3 days a week or pick up a part-time job or, do a bit of consulting or whatever. I was kind of, stapled to my sponsor in that respect. So for about the first year of StartSomeGood, I did juggle it with a full-time job, and essentially kind of did my best to run the organization from the train as I commuted up and down to Silicon Valley, and then was doing phone calls or running webinars in my lunch break. And it was kind of mad and difficult, and probably made me, not as effective as I would have been at that other job, which caused some tensions as well. It was clear that my heart and my mind was a little bit somewhere else. But during that time, my co-founder Alex was kind of full time from day one. And I kind of think someone has to be. I mean, it's tricky. I think you don't want to jump into things too early. But if it's no one's main thing, it's hard to make significant progress, in my experience.
And like, could you also share like how was your thinking process? Like, did you like graduated and then you start like a couple of nonprofit? Like, do you already plan it out from the beginning, or were you just kind of new? All right, or you just suddenly have an idea. Oh, I wanted to start that because I saw that problem and I wanted to solve. Like, how was that?
Yeah, I'm not a big planner, to be honest. I'm just not someone who like looks all that far ahead by nature. I didn't know what I wanted to do at university until it was time to write down until it was time to start selecting, until I had to. And then I chose, I did a Bachelor of Arts, so I did political science and history because my interest is in people and change making and so on. And but right through university, I was just throwing myself into projects and, publishing. The first full-time job I ever got, funnily enough, was I took a year off uni at this point. I was a bit burnt out. My degree took a lot longer than it should have. I went part-time at university. I had too much else on to keep up with university. So it took me 5 years in the end to do my 3-year degree. But part of that was I took a whole year off because I just decided to go get a job and, do that for a little while. And the job I got was in a magazine publisher. And the only reason I was able to get that job, I was selling ads in a couple of magazines. I was an advertising manager. And the reason I got that job was because I published a zine at university. I published my own magazine at university and sold ads to .com startups as a way of, them getting on campus to a certain extent, because we were, a student body allowed to distribute our stuff on campus. And so I just kind of off my own bat started calling people and selling ads and published this magazine. And so then I just went for a job and, was able to get that job based on, I think that's kind of been the story of my life to a lot of things. I just start doing things, I try things, and then hopefully I rapidly acquire enough skills and or confidence to kind of get someone to start paying me to do that kind of thing. And it's never really been about my degree as such. There aren't many jobs that are like super specifically just for like political science and philosophy graduates. It's kind of about what you do. And so university for me was like my degree was important to me. I enjoyed it and I'm glad I got it. And it's, but it was not really about the degree. It was about the time I had, is the way I felt about university, kind of that those 5 years, or the 4 years of the 5 years I was on campus, and the chance that gave me to meet so many people, to learn from so many different perspectives, and to kind of have that safe environment to just do stuff, to just, when you're a student, you can justify spending a lot of time publishing a zine or putting on a concert or holding a film screening or all those sorts of things. So that was a important space and time for me. But but I had no idea what I wanted to do that whole time. It kind of, to my surprise, one of those things I just started doing turned into something that, not immediately, but could start, where we could start bringing enough money to actually pay me. And then even when we moved to the US, when I left Firewire in 2008 and moved to the US, I just had this vague idea that it would be, that I wanted to work in America for a while, because it seemed like they were just a bit ahead, in terms of what I was really interested in, which is the strategic use of technology for social change. It felt like America was a bit ahead of where we were in Australia, and I wanted to experience that. But I knew hardly anything about what was involved in moving to America when I moved to America. I hadn't lined up a sponsor. I wasn't fully on top of what was involved. I somehow convinced my girlfriend, now wife, to quit a job she loved and come with me on this kind of fairly harebrained plan. But yeah, not a big planner. I just threw myself into things, started meeting, rocked up, started meeting people, started trying to find out what was going on and who might be looking for someone. And then, once again, before too long, was able to find a really good fit for me that was willing to kind of go through the sponsorship process. And that was with an organization called Ashoka, who were really one of the pioneers around social entrepreneurship. So it was a really good landing place for me, and I learned a lot. But yeah, StartSomeGood, I couldn't have been less interested in starting a company. I just moved to San Francisco. I'd been there like 6 weeks. I barely settled in. I was living on, my wife and I were living on an air mattress in an apartment. We hadn't had time to buy furniture. I was working for a startup. I felt like I had more than enough on in my life. So when Alex called me with this kind of idea and this pitch, I said, no way. No, I'm not the slightest bit interested, Alex. I've just got here. I'm busy. I want to make friends. I want to party. And he said, well, how about you just would you just be an advisor? I'm like, yeah, sure, Alex, no worries. But then 2 weeks later, it was all I was thinking about. And so I had to throw myself into it. But yeah, nothing I've ever done has really been a well thought out plan, to be honest. I just kind of throw myself into things, and sometimes they're complete disasters, and sometimes they work out, and I do that thing for 10 years.
Right. An interesting story that you have. I think, like, even though you said that you didn't really intentionally plan that out, but it sounded that because of the studies that you have in university, you're interested in art, in history, and then later on you went to the event, you found your mission that you wanted to make an impact in the social impact sector, which leads to all the different nonprofit things that you started eventually to start some good. And like that you mentioned about, you just jump in and then you discover if that is actually a good fit for you. So like seeing you StartSomeGood for like so many years and being entrepreneur for so many years, and you've acquired a lot of different skills along the way. Like, what would you say is the most important skills that you need or you have in order to bring the company or grow the company into where it is today?
I actually think my most important skill is resilience. That I'm able to stick with things for a long time. I don't burn out. I don't get discouraged easily. I'm good at working hard, but I'm also good at switching off. I think I learned quite early to kind of have a few, kind of some slightly separate worlds in my life, and that despite the fact I work really hard, I can then step away and be in another world with a different group of friends for a while, or go to a music festival. Well, not right now, but something I've historically enjoyed. And so, yeah, I think that's really crucial. It's really become my belief over the years that the number one reason that startups fail is because the founders burn out. That a lot of it's just a game of staying alive long enough for things to start clicking together, to try enough things, to stick with it for long enough, to watch the people who are less committed begin to fall by the wayside, or who are just into it because startups are the fad of the moment. And then after a certain period of time, things just begin to come together a little bit more. And so I think that's definitely my number one skill, is just plugging away. I don't think I have any particular genius for any other piece of it, but if you plug away for long enough, you actually get somewhere.
So this part is more of like the soft skill part, or internal, but
but it's actually quite hard. Yeah, it is a soft skill, but it's the hardest soft skill.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's because it speaks to who you are, your expectations for yourself, the story you tell yourself, your confidence versus anxieties, and it's why a lot of founders really struggle with mental health. So yeah, it is what we call a soft skill, but let's not confuse that for something that is easy or unimportant.
Right. Like, so if you would have share like some of the tips of how do you actually build that, or where did you even understand that you actually need this in order to sustain yourself, to not burn out, or to support yourself for a long period of time? Like, what would that be? Like, how did you build that?
And once again, it's not that I don't think I recognized that I needed it and then set about kind of trying to make myself resilient. I just kind of over time learned, I guess, a few key techniques that work for me. And I think for it's a little bit different for everyone. For some people it's getting up at 5 a.m. and doing exercise is really important. That's not so much my thing. But a few other things that are really important to me. One is the ability to step away. That's easier said than done. I mean, I think a lot of people worry about things, but one of my also beliefs is that often when you're like bashing away at something and it's not working and you're getting frustrated, what you need is not more work, but you need a new way of thinking about the problem. And that new way of thinking almost never comes when you're there beating your head on the problem. It comes when you go for a walk and are willing to let your mind wander for a while. So there's this kind of negative feedback loop, I feel like, when people get stressed and they're behind where they want to be, and the work is piling up and they feel like they can't take a break because they haven't got a chance to take a break. Instead, it's working. But actually what they most need is a break, because they need a new way of approaching this stuff. And so innovation only comes from what a lot of people need, what the world needs, indeed, I think, is not just kind of not more work, not just more of the things that are already proven to work. We need breakthroughs, we need new ways of thinking. And so there's a real, I think there's this funny trick for entrepreneurship that you do often speed up by letting yourself slow down in the moment. But that involves then the confidence to do that. I'm a big kind of, I don't know, Paul, I like getting things done methodology. It's a bit old school now. I think I read that when I was at university. But this idea that you never carry anything in your head, it drives my wife a little bit crazy, but I refuse to remember anything. I refuse to try and remember anything. If there's something that's on, it needs to be in my calendar. If there's something I have to do, it needs to be in my to-do list. And provided, so I obsessively like record things, I like drives my wife is like, you can't expect me to turn up to anything if you haven't put it in our shared calendar, because like, I'm not placing any of those expectations on my own brain to keep track of like what I said yes to and so on and so forth. And so the GTS, or getting things done, GTD, is all about trying to get things out of your head.
Yeah.
And just constantly processing. So I do that a little bit obsessively, but it then helps me relax. I have one of the, you have an idea at night or whatever, and I don't sit in bed worrying about it. I just kind of write it down, whack it into my ideas list on my phone, and then go back to sleep pretty promptly. Right. So that's a big one for me.
Got it. I love the GST method as well, like the getting things done method. And I think...
Sorry, I keep saying GSD because inside our company, we call our to-do list getting done. Getting a four-letter word that starts with S. Don't know what the rating is for this recording and so on. And so it's rewired my brain. It's not getting things done. It's getting... So sorry, I kept saying the wrong, confusing acronym. Yeah.
Just in case people don't understand, like what is the method that you're talking about? It's actually from is it David Allen?
David Allen, that's it. I said
Yeah,
Paul Allen, but he's the
yeah,
Microsoft guy, isn't he?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think I'll ask you the last question, and then to see, and then the remaining 10-15 minutes, we can see if there's anybody who wants to ask. So just wanted to ask, like, if, like, what advice would you give for a student who is, for example, they are in this period of time, they have a lot more free time, and then they're maybe about to graduate, they're not exactly sure what they should be doing. So what would you suggest them to, like, spend this period of time to better improve themselves, or even find their passion or mission? Like, what advice would you have for them?
I mean, I'm a big believer that I'm a big believer in general with entrepreneurs solving problems they've experienced. And I think that if you are trying to work on a problem that you yourself don't directly experience, which is also important, I don't want to dismiss that, because that's the root of empathy, and that's helping others, you know, and that you don't have to necessarily suffer from a condition to want to devote your energies to improving it. But I think that if that is you, you have to really apprentice yourself to the problem. I can't remember who said this, but this idea that I really like in entrepreneurship, that you should be in love with the problem and not your solution. Whatever you think your solution is probably wrong, and is probably going to need a whole lot of revision along the way. So you have to be in love with the problem to really stick with that. And so, if, you know, like for me, and you know, I'm in love with the problem of how do we get more people involved in making a difference, so to speak, or I would call it the opportunity. But you know, I'm in love with that, and that's led me to do a million different things. You know, film festivals, events, co-working spaces, crowdfunding platforms, accelerators, all sorts of stuff. As I continue to kind of work away at that particular problem, and continue to be fascinated by it, and continue to kind of try and make a difference in that area. And so I don't know how you necessarily just create that, but I think it's an important thing to recognize in yourself, because I think it's easy sometimes for people to get kind of really captivated by a particular idea for a solution they've had. And that's often, in my experience, you know, that it can be kind of a little bit superficial, can be a little bit naive around the situation, particularly if they haven't spent that time really understanding and listening. So it could be a powerful time to spend listening. You know, if someone has an interest in a particular topic and doesn't feel expert enough in it, doesn't have kind of the idea yet, that's fine, because it's totally fine to be an exploratory listening and learning phase. And I think one of the really interesting byproducts of the moment we're in right now with COVID is that while, you know, a lot of classes are cancelled and there's a lot of disruption locally, it means that a huge amount of stuff's going online. And so while our local events are in many ways cancelled, we all have access to each other's events all around the world all of a sudden, which can feel a little bit overwhelming. There's suddenly, you know, every event is available to everyone because they're almost all online now. But that's also kind of an incredible smorgasbord of ideas and inspiration and learning, a lot of it very low cost right now. A lot of people, I think, are putting stuff online or creating online events, just as you guys have done, because because you've recognized that there's a need right now, and it's not about, you're not charging for it, I don't think, and and that's a lot of stuff right now. I think there's a lot of, I feel like in some ways the response to COVID globally has been quite inspiring. You know, I think a lot of people worried early on that things, you know, situations like this can make people fearful and therefore selfish, worrying only about themselves and only about their family. And it looks very much to me like the opposite has happened, which is incredibly inspiring. So many people are trying to think about how they can actually connect with the community around them, even if they're stuck at in their own home, and how they can kind of offer something. So it's a wonderful moment to be actually I wish I had kind of more time for learning myself. But if you are in kind of more of a learning and exploring phase, I just feel like you've got this incredible array of opportunities to you. If I could be so bold as to take this moment just talking about online events to give a shout out to our big online event, which is next week, the Starting Good Virtual Summit, which is at www.starting.gd. It's an online summit around social entrepreneurship. So we have like 35 successful social enterprise founders and thought leaders sharing over 30 hours of content about their learnings along the way, practical workshops, panel discussions, keynotes, in conversation with, a lot of cool stuff. So I don't know, but there's so much more beyond that as well. Right. I think it's really exciting. I hope and one of the things that makes me hopeful about this time, I've always believed, you know, and I'm not claiming to be alone in this, but you know, that online events have a really important role to play in allowing us to connect beyond geography and to learn more globally and be just a little bit more stitched together as a global community. And I think it's exciting that now everyone is learning how to do online events. and everyone is willing to give online events a go. I think there's a lot of people who never would have imagined that they would attend a virtual summit as recently as a few months ago, who are now willing to attend a virtual summit, and a lot of organizations who never would have imagined that they would organize a virtual summit or anything like that, doing so as well. And this is a great skill set. I think that there's a lot of organizations learning how to convene community online, learning how to teach online, learning how to share stories online. I think that's going to stand us in good stead, even when we can get back out to offline events as well.
Agree. I mean, I agree. Like right now, even joining global events, like different industry of different topics of events, it's an amazing opportunity for us to learn. And I also signed up for your virtual summit, so I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to that. So let's see if there is any question that you want to ask, if you're in the room.
Sure. Hey Tom, thanks for that. That was amazing. I don't know if you know, but I sit on the VibeWire board now, and actually,
really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So I'm really close with Gavin. So about
brilliant.
12 months ago, he's like, "You want to come do this?" And when you're talking about how hard it is to raise money, and all these butted in, I'm like, "It's still hard to raise money."
Yeah, well, exactly. It's systemically hard, is what I decided. What I realized. I didn't know at first. It's hard to tell when you have kind of a sample size of one, your own experience. I thought maybe it's hard because I suck at this. But I eventually became convinced that it's hard because it's hard.
Yeah.
Not because I'm not good at it.
And also because I work in advertising by day, it is even more interesting to see what they waste money on. That's a different issue.
Yeah.
Firstly, I really liked your point on soft skills are sort of the hardest. And I really heard you on the learning how to switch off and switch out. With that, sometimes I'm finding that tipping point between leadership and management of yourself is kind of the two things I'm fighting with. Do you have any advice in the terms of, it's a bit like you, I don't really get phased out, so it bothers me when other people get hit hard, and I'm kind of like, what do you mean you're tired? Like, don't worry about it, just keep going. And like, again, music festivals are a great way to switch off. But how do you inspire other people to kind of take note where they can without, crushing them into a dust?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I was fascinated by this, over the years at VibeWire. So I was there, 8.5 years, and would have worked with hundreds and hundreds of mostly volunteers. And we treated our volunteers very seriously. They had job titles, and it was quite a competitive. Like, it was hard to get a serious volunteer role with us. Even we interview a dozen people anyway. But we kind of we treated them like, we expected people to act like it was a job as well. It just didn't have a financial exchange. But we thought kind of setting that expectation was important. But it used to really fascinate me to watch kind of the people who burnt out weren't the people who were working the hardest, hardly ever. It's a cliche that you need something done, give it to a busy person, but there's something to that, because often busy people are kind of good at being busy, good at getting things done. And often people who are seemingly less busy are very busy worrying about the stuff they should be doing. And I think it is that key thing of being able to switch on or off. Like, I would notice these people who were like perpetually worried about how much they needed to get done, but seemingly never getting anything done. And I just couldn't personally understand, because I'm the opposite of that. I don't worry about it and I get things done, and they worried about it and didn't get things done. And I don't know if I ever figured out the secret for how you can kind of necessarily snap someone out of that. But I think that the trick I learned was treating people, regardless, volunteers or not, treating them really seriously, giving them important things to do, giving people quite a lot of trust, but then withdrawing that trust quite quickly. That when people weren't meeting me halfway, I would move on and try and find someone else quite quickly. So I would give people important things to do. No one's just fetching the coffee or whatever, but they're an intern or a paid staff member. But then if you're not up for that, the sooner we figure that out and get you, and often those people are relieved to be relieved, of their duties, because they were stressing out about it and not getting it done anyway.
I think it's good advice. Thank you.
Thanks.
Cool. Does there anybody have any question? Cyron, you have any question?
Anyone want to know anything about crowdfunding? Here's good advice about crowdfunding.
Yeah, I've got some advice, and I'm not sure whether to push that. There's a couple of crowd ventures I'm looking at the moment through crowd venture funds,
Hmm.
and I don't know if you've seen this, but there's a lot of money left on the table pre-COVID. So there was a lot of, like, certainly, and again, I'm just in Sydney, so there was a lot of money just ready to be invested, and it got slowed down by the bushfires a little bit for internal investment.
Yeah.
But then from externally, I knew there were a few companies who were about to set up shop here, so there's a lot of money on the table. Do you think that's going anywhere fast? Do you think people are going to slow that down too much, or do you think they're going to rush back in and start investing there?
God, I don't know. I'm not an economist or a futurist when it comes to this stuff. I think it's really interesting watching the impact in the kind of more, I guess, the impact space. Disasters tend to be when we're at our most generous, but the dynamic tends to be people who are less affected, like people who are unaffected, or only modestly affected, supporting people who are significantly affected. COVID is kind of quite a different dynamic as disasters go. You know, the bushfires are incredibly extreme for one group of people, and then, I mean, everyone dealt with smoke pollution and so on, and that tends to be, and then whereas COVID is obviously affecting everyone's sense of security about the future. And when we're really uncertain about the future, it's a lot less likely for people to be generous. I saw a really interesting take, actually. There's a guy called Mark Pesci. I don't know if anyone, this is a recommendation for anyone who's not familiar with him. He is a bit more of a futurist. He's a really early technology guy. He's American, but lives in Sydney these days. He's been publishing a book called The Next 100 Seconds in 100-second installments in videos and a podcast, essentially, that's 100 seconds at a time. And he had a really interesting one last week about time horizons for planning, and how things, you know, that we almost reached this point of singularity in early March where people really couldn't plan more than half an hour ahead. Like, it just felt like things were changing so quickly that you literally lost confidence that you could predict what was going to happen by the afternoon. And obviously that's a crippling sensation. If you feel like you don't know what the afternoon's going to bring, let alone tomorrow, there's a very natural tendency to want to, like, hoard and hold on to what you've had, which is where we saw, I mean, the hoarding in the supermarkets was always overblown. We have a just-in-time supply chain, so it takes very little to kind of disrupt the just-in-time model. But nonetheless, that kind of dynamic where everyone was getting really fearful and worrying about, will I have toilet paper next week? And just basic things that we normally take for granted, people get to worry about. And then this point was, we've got to the point now where most people can see about 30 days ahead. Yeah. Give or take, you know, so we can kind of plan out the next month. Yeah. You know, what are we doing this month? How are we going to connect with our community this month, or support our students this month? Or and then he thought by the end of this month, we'll probably be able to plan about to the end of the year again, give or take, like whether that's continuing lockdowns or opening up. We'll probably have a bit of a sense either way of how we feel about it and how it's going. And hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be back to being able to plan a couple of years ahead. So I think that will have, I think those kind of time horizons will have enormous impacts on people's willingness to invest, because investment is obviously based on a future time horizon. It's foregoing an asset now in the hope of a greater asset later on. And so it requires a certain confidence in the future. So yeah, I think it would be, I think it's quite challenging. We were working on a new joint venture company that we were just starting to raise money for, and we've just stopped for now. There's just no point. Seemingly, you know, and so we're just kind of wait and see, like everyone else. We know that the next 30, we're confident that the next 30 days, to come back to Mark's timeframes, the next 30 days, we reckon are not going to be a good time to fundraise. By the end of the next 30 days, we might know whether we think the second half of the year is even viable.
Good. A lot to think about.
Yeah, it's crazy times.
And Tafumani, I saw you switch on your camera. Do you have anything that you wanted to ask? I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, because.
All right, my name is Tapumani. Actually,
good to meet you.
I kind of joined the conversation a bit late. I was having difficulties in joining, but yeah, I like the idea, and I've been researching a lot about you, Tom, and yeah. Actually, we have one of our, it's called Impact Hub Harare here in Zimbabwe. They are doing something, I think, with your organization. It's StartSomeGood. Yeah.
Yeah.
Impact
that's
Hub
us.
Harare. I don't know what is it about. Yeah, exactly. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, sure. But otherwise, I have nothing much to do. Yeah.
Cool.
It's great to see you. I'm glad you came on camera. Nice to meet you.
Sure.
And very cool to know that things have been shared around locally where you are.
Yeah.
So to wrap this up, like, do you have any suggestions, like where do you draw inspiration for your like personal growth for the social impact business that you're in? Like, what do you, I don't know, where do you get inspired? Is it like TV shows or documentaries, books? Like, do you have any suggestions of the places
Yeah.
that got you inspired?
Actually, this is one of my funny little resilience tips, actually, that I didn't share. So I'm big on audiobooks these days. I've always loved books, but I kind of got out of the habit of reading for about a decade there or so, or got slower. I read less and less and less as I got older and busier and more responsibilities. And, you know, so I went from reading whatever it was, 25 books a year to 12 to 6 to 4 or something. And then I fell in love with podcasts, and that led on to audiobooks. And now I'm like really into books again. Because I like to walk, as I said, I like to get away from my camera and my screen rather. Camera, hilarious. It feels like it's just a camera these days because I'm always on Zoom. And I do listen to, you know, great books by social entrepreneurs, particularly, or just stories about startups. I love great, you know, startups and entrepreneur biographies and stories. But I have a particular genre that I listen to a lot. I almost always have one book of this kind on the go, which is people having a really hard time, like a proper hard time. Like I love books on mountaineering, which are always about disasters. You know, they like a book with someone just getting smoothly up the hill and back down again doesn't tend to make a good book. It's always like lost in a storm, stuck down a crevice. I went through a phase where I've listened to basically every book about the romantic age of exploration in Antarctica. You know, like 120 years ago, people exploring the Antarctic with bugger all equipment and so on. I went through a bit of a phase of reading a bunch of biographies of child soldiers from Sudan, like kind of bleak stuff at times, but I think it really helps me because I think, part of where I think people burn out is that life becomes hard and we lose perspective as to what it means, what's really hard. And so when I'm feeling like, oh, everything's too hard, I like to remind myself that it's not really hard. Like, I mean, it's, you know, it's stressful and I've got ambitious goals, but I live in a really safe, prosperous country. I have a lovely family. I have a roof over my head. I have, you know, I'm very prosperous overall. And so I like to just kind of, you know, reframe my experience and go, oh, I know what hard looks like. Hard looks like your village being burnt down and having to walk for 4 days to get to the nearest refugee camp. I'm doing better than that. So I don't know if I'd say that's where I get inspiration from exactly, but it is kind of part of my process or whatever that I enjoy. So I love a good, you know, a good difficult adventure book of someone having a, you know, humans surviving, humans being resilient under difficult circumstances, and then a lot of, you know, for more timely stuff and up to date stuff, you know, a lot of podcasts, a lot of good podcasts about social entrepreneurship. A couple of good ones out of Australia are Impact Boom and Humans of Purpose. General entrepreneurship podcasts like How I Built This is really good. I just think, you know, stories of entrepreneurs overcoming is something that I'm endlessly fascinated and inspired by.
Wow, I really love this tip. I feel it's so powerful because sometimes I also fall into the trap of thinking what is happening is hard. But then if I put into the perspective, I would actually realize that, oh, I live in Hong Kong and everything is like safe and healthy and great and it's not really that hard. So I really love, and it's interesting to see that is kind of like the secret of you of being resilient is to always have some hard story that you will read in order to keep your perspective there. So
yeah, and it makes it grateful for what you do have, you know, understanding that there are others with so much less. I think it reminds you to be grateful for family, friends, safety, you know, the basic things, beauty, natural beauty, and all of that sort of stuff.
I agree. I definitely will add that to my book list. A friend was actually recommending me to read David Dawkins, Can't Hurt Me. I don't know if you've read it. Yeah, I don't know if you've read it, but he told me it's also about like a person of like tough story, mental toughness. It should also.
Yeah, right now.
Yeah, Can't Hurt Me.
Oh, Can't Hurt Me out of it. David Dawkins. There we go. They have it on Audible. That's lucky.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's the Navy guy or the Air Force guy or something. That's right. Yeah, I've seen this cover. Anyway, thanks for the tip.
Yeah.
if I could leave one final book tip, she's on my mind because I'm about to interview her for the summit, which I'm really excited about. So I re-listened to her book, just finished it yesterday, The Blue Sweater by Jacqueline Novogratz. I can't recommend that highly enough. And she's the founder of Acumen Fund, one of the real pioneers in impact investment and social enterprise. I'm super excited right now that I'm about to, in another hour, interview her, have a chat, and I hope you'll all come, join the summit and check out that conversation next week.
Just signed up.
Brilliant.
Cool. That's
Good man.
amazing. Amazing.
One more. Cool, guys.
Cool.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing all the things, like your story and also the tip that you've learned.
My pleasure. Thank you for doing this. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
All right, bye everyone. Have a great evening or day wherever you are.
Yep. Bye-bye. Bye, Tom.
Bye.